Hey everyone, Norm with SoundTraxx here, back with another install video. Today we're going to be upgrading this GS4 from Kato to Tsunami2.
So here we have the newly re-released GS4 from Kato, and let's just jump right into it. We're going to need to do a little bit of prep work before we can actually get to the install. There are a few things that need changed, a few things that need modification. So let's just start by taking the tender shell off. Let's take the cab off. And you're just going to want to wiggle this a little bit. Do be aware that when doing this, just taking it off, you're going to have these which angle inward, so you're going to basically need to do that, or do that rather, in order to get it off. And then this just slides forward like that and comes right off. Now, at this point, it's worth noting the biggest chunk, or rather the hardest of the prep work, is actually going to be modifying this board. I have already done that because it's actually a fairly long and tedious process, but you're going to want to remove the little transistor connected to these three contact pads that sits here. You're going to want to remove the little component that sits here between these two solder pads, and you're going to want to remove the little component that sits here between these two solder pads. But in this case, we've already done that, so we can set that to the side. Now, we're going to want to remove our weight. Now there are a few components here that we'll be removing and won't be replacing when the reinstall. These little contact pads can go. This blanking board can go. And this top drawbar can also go. So this is what we're left with. Now at this point, I'm actually going to go ahead and put this back in, just cause. So at this point, we're going to want to take our weight back, and we're going to want to sort of see how it lines up here. What we're going to want to pay attention to is where it sits in here, because we're going to be putting this, which is a DBX 9000. I've already prepped it. I've tinned these 5 solder pads and cut off the 4 wires we aren't going to use. So we're left with 5 wires in the center, and we're going to want to put this right in here. Now the reason we want to have the weight here for this part is because we actually want to leave enough of a gap right here for the wires from our 1100, which is going to sit here, to sneak underneath and solder to those points. So let's go ahead and get to it. So we're going to want to keep this weight here, and then we're going to want to sort of line this up so that there's just enough room for the wires to snake through. And choose a reference point or some way to figure out to keep that distance in your mind. All right. And then we're going to want to take that off. Now, remember where you had that point? So for me, it's actually the end of this little ridge right here is going to line up with the end with this little solder point right here on the DBX 9000. So what we're going to want to do is figure out where it sits. And as you can see in this case, the hole is not quite, but just about over this little gap right here. So we're going to want to take a look at the back now and figure out how big we want to cut our piece of double-sided tape. Should be noted at this point, we don't want it too big, because if it comes forward, it's liable to rub against this point right here, which will interfere with the locomotive going around bends. So we just want a little tiny piece, basically just enough to cover this hole. And that's really about it. So I'm going to get that piece of tape, and I will be right back. So as you can see, we have our little piece of tape here. Now what we're going to want to do is carefully lift up the protective piece on that tape, set it to one side, and now we're going to want to line it up so that the tape just about sits in the center of the DBX 9000. Now also keep in mind your little reference point that you've chosen. I can just barely see the little lip there that I chose. Now, just to double check, we're going to want to bring our weight back. Oh yeah, see, we got loads of room there. So now we want to move on to our next step, which in this case is actually going to be placing another component. So we want our weight again. And this time, we're actually going to want to set up our speaker. So to do this, there's a couple things we need to do. One, you'll note there are these little small pieces right there that are actually going to kind of interfere with what we want to do, because we're going to be setting this up with a tail light sitting right about here. Problem is that tail light is actually rather big. So we need to move this speaker as far forward as we can, and that involves getting rid of these two pieces. So we're going to do that, and then we're also going to get rid of these little bits in here, which slide in right there, and we will be right back. All right, so as you can see, we've gone ahead and we've removed the two little pieces right there. We've gone ahead and removed the line right there and right there. So now we're ready to move on to actually placing our speaker. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to sort of hold it right there. Just make sure it's butting right up against this piece, because if it's not, that means we won't have enough room. So now at this point, we're going to want to get a piece of double-sided tape ready for it. So as you can see, we've gone ahead and cut a piece of tape and stuck it to the bottom of our little mini cube, which I've already actually sealed off camera. So we're just going to go ahead, take our knife, and peel very gently, just like so. So now we have our cube, and we're going to go ahead and just line it up and stick it down. And that's our speaker done. So now we can move on to finishing up the rest of the stuff that needs to go in the bottom of the tender. So we have our TSU-1100, which is actually going to sit right about here, and our capacitor that's going to sit right about there. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take this and sit it about here. We're going to need to split off our blue wire, but the rest of these can pretty much all go down here, except for our pickup leads, which are actually going to want to go down and under, but not to the DBX 9000. We're actually going to want to connect those to these copper pieces down there. And that's how we're going to pick up from the locomotive wheels. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done, and I will be back with you shortly. At this point, we've connected some of our wires. You'll notice I have not filled in this spot with our blue wire yet, because we need to do some splitting on it. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to take our red and black wires and connect them up. So I am going to connect them here and here, but it's also possible to run them back and down there and connect them here and here. But I prefer to run them forward, so we're going to connect them here and here. So I will do that and be back with you shortly. So as you can see, we've gone ahead and installed our red wire on our contact point there and our black wire on our contact point there. So what we can do now is we can place our weight back on. We will need to remove this at some point. And as you can see, all of our wires run nice and neatly right through that gap into our DBX 9000. So what we're actually going to do now is we're going to get our blue wire sorted so that it's split into all the pieces it needs to go into. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to actually take this and split it so that it goes 3 different directions. One way is going to go into our DBX9000 and is going to head forward. One way is actually going to head to our capacitor that's going to sit right there. And another is actually going to head to our tail light that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and get that dealt with, and I will be right back. All right, so what we've done here is we've actually split the insulation in the middle and right here on the other one. And the reason I split it this far away so that it can go underneath and connect to our DBX9000. Now what we're going to do here is we're actually going to want to almost twist these around each other to solder them together. So now we're going to take our soldering iron and our solder and we're just going to connect them up. So we're going to need a little bit of flux. And we're going to want to take our pliers and now we can solder them together. Like so. All right, now with that joint made, we're going to want to take our heat shrink, measure just a little piece, cut it like so. I'm just going to slide it over the end there and onto our solder joint, where we're now going to go ahead and hold our soldering iron near it in order to shrink it down, just like so. So with that done, now we can actually go ahead and tin this end and connect it to the remaining spot on our DBX9000, which is what I'm going to do right after this. So now with that done, we can go ahead and connect our blue wire to the remaining spot on our DBX9000 right here. So I'm going to do that and I will be right back with you. All right, so with our blue wire attached to the correct spot on our DBX9000, we can actually go ahead and set our decoder down. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit tricky with this install. So unfortunately, because we have this little lip right there, we actually can't use double-sided tape to set this down, as it would cause this to be too high. So what we're going to do is we're going to get something that can attach it with no Z height, not glue. So either a very, very thin double-sided tape, or what I'm actually going to use, just a little bit of this tacky wax stuff. And we're just going to set that to the side. We're just going to apply a small amount to the bottom of our decoder and just stick it down like so. And now you can see that's not going anywhere. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to get our capacitor set up. So these wires can go off to the side, and we're going to go ahead and set up our capacitor, and I will be right back. So with our capacitor placed, you've noticed I've also trimmed the leads just a little bit. We're going to want to take our green and yellow wire and solder it to one lead, and the longer of these two blue wires, so this one, and solder it to the other lead. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and be right back. All right, so as you can see, what we've done is we've actually taken our two wires for the negative for the capacitor and the common positive, and we've connected them to the capacitor right there. I've also taken the liberty of going ahead and just cable managing those so they're out of the way for future. Now what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to get our green wire out of the way, and we're actually going to want to connect up our speaker. So what we're going to do is we're basically just going to run them over or around, depending on what you've used to secure this and how much height it takes up to our speaker. So I'm going to do that and be right back. All right, so as you can see, I've gone ahead and run the wires behind the capacitor and soldered them up right like so. Now what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to move onto the engine. we're going to deal with this wire and our remaining common positive lead for our tail light later. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure we kept track of which wires from here we soldered to what on the DBX9000, as these are not marked. So I know, since what I did is I actually just soldered direct from, or kept the order from here, I know that my orange wire is this one. I know that my blue wire is the next one over from that, which is this one. And then I know my two functions are these, and that my other motor lead is this guy. So what we're going to do is we're actually, for now, just going to want to take these and put them out of the way and focus on our motor leads, assuming these will cooperate and stay. Thank you. Now, this is where things get tricky. The GS4 is rather interesting to take apart. So, I thought I told you to stay. We're going to first want to carefully lift here, and that will allow us to take out this detail piece here, revealing a Phillips head screw. There's another Phillips head screw there. We're just going to go ahead and take those out real quick, or at least get them loose, because sometimes this one does not want to come out. This one usually does. And that's those two, so I'm actually just going to go ahead and take them out with these guys so that they don't go everywhere. Then we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So I'm going to do that, and I'll be right back with you. So with all four of those screws removed, what we're going to do is we're going to take our light board and take it out again. Now, what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to carefully take that section and lift it up, and after we spread this remaining bit of the shell apart to get it past these, it'll come out. Now apparently in this case, this piece wanted to come unclipped, and then we're also going to want to actually make sure that piece stays right there. So what we're going to want to do now is we're actually going to want to take these little pieces out, and we're actually going to want to solder our motor wires right here on the end, so that when it's back in, the wires sit right here. So I'm going to do that, and I will be back with you shortly. So as you can see, we've got this soldered to our little motor lead, and now we need to do it for the other one right there. So I will do that and be right back with you. All right, so now as you can see, we've got both of these soldered in, and what we're going to want to do now is just take them and slide them right back in where they were, like so. In theory anyway. Like so. Now you may need a little bit of pressure because these are held in by little bumps in there, and we did add some thickness to this bit, so sometimes it does require just a little bit of force to get it back in there, like that, but that's done. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to work on reassembling the engine here. So we're going to want to lift that up, and we're going to want to be careful to make sure that these wires we've run fit through this little hole right here that is no longer occupied by that drawbar that was once there. Now we're going to need to pull the frame apart just this little bit to get it in there. Now for the really tricky bit, we've also got to deal with this drive shaft down here. So we're going to want to basically push it up, and then as this falls in, just sort of guide it in until everything just pops back together, like so. All right, now with all that done, we can go ahead and re-add our screws from earlier. So we're just gonna take them, make sure you've got the little plastic bits on them, and we're going to, not all the way, let's screw them in most of the way, and we'll come back in just a second once they all are in and tighten them down all the way. The reason we do this is so that everything lines up properly, because if we just screwed them in all the way, it's possible for the main unit here to not sit down properly. It's incredibly rare, but I have had it happen to me. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna get these in most of the way. This is the last screw, so we can actually do this one up all the way. Like so. Then we'll come back to this one, like so. Now we'll come back to the two on this side that we just screwed in and tighten them down. Not too tight, just finger tight, like so. And now we can go ahead and re-add these things, or these pieces rather. Make sure that these little plastic pieces on the side here are pressed down into the appropriate holes, as they are secured in places to the sides of the firebox. So we're just gonna lift this up a little bit so its peg is not in the way, and then that all can just get pressed down, like so. Now we're pretty much in the home stretch. At this point, it's connecting a few more wires, and then pretty much we've only got the tail light left to go after this. So what we're gonna wanna do here is, you may have noticed these two clips on the side are still here. We're actually going to want to take those off. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove our two light pipes. Like so. Now we're going to want to pull these little clips at the front, and the light board will just pop out. We'll take our two clips, disconnect them, so we're left with that. These can go over there. Now, this board can just sit right in there. Now we just reattach our light pipes. Like so. And since we already desoldered our three components, we are now good to replace this. And it's going to go just sit right there. Now, these are our three wires coming from our decoder, and these carry our, what normally is our front and rear light and our common. But in this case, we're actually going to be repurposing the rear light to do the Mars light. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to connect these three to the appropriate spots on this board. So I will do that and be right back with you. So now what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to trace the wire we soldered our common positive to, in this case, or rather in this case on my install here, this is the second from the leftmost side. And we're just going to want to figure out which one of the wires on the other side it is, and it looks like it's this one. Yep. So now we're going to want to take this wire, we're going to want to untangle it from the rest. Now these two can actually go over there. And we're going to want to line it up so that it connects to this pad here. So we're just going to cut it to length, like so. Now I'm going to go ahead, strip, tin, and solder this, and I'll be back with you in a moment. All right, so now with our positive soldered in, we're going to actually want to take these two wires. We're going to want to figure out, again, which one is our headlight and which one is our tail light. So we're going to want to figure out where our white wire goes. Now, remember, I did keep the ordering from this plug. So what I can do is I can actually just look and see, okay, white wire is for the center of yellow wire, which means my center wire right here is going to be my white wire, which is going to be my headlight. And thus we're going to want to solder it to the contact pad right here, corresponding to this light right here, because on the GS4, the bottom light is the headlight. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing. Cut, strip, tin, solder right there, and we will be right back. All right, so now with this one done and this one done, we're actually going to be on to connecting our Mars light to our yellow backup light wire. Now, this is this wire, just due to process of elimination, it's the only one left that we ran forward, and it's going to be connected to this middle solder pad right here where the transistor once was. So we're just going to cut this to fit and do the exact same procedure all over again. Strip, tin, solder, and we will be right back. All right, and now with our 3 wires run, we're on to cable management. So one thing to bear attention of here is we've got our spinning flywheel right here, which means we want to make sure our wires do not interfere with the flywheel. So we're just going to run it sort of to the side, over here, and then down. Now we're going to do the same thing with these two on this side. They're just going to want to run basically just like that and like that. And then we're going to want to tape them down right across here so that they stay right where we want them to be and do not interfere with our flywheel. So I'll go ahead, get these taped down, and be right back. All right, so with all of our wires taped down, we're ready to start cable managing down here. So as you can see, I've already done a little bit as we've been going along, but it's not enough. So the way we're going to run these, in order to not destroy too much of the detail on the inside of the cab, is actually we're going to want to run these just about in that area. Then we're just going to want to do the exact same thing over here, like so. You can see those are nicely routed, but they're not staying at the moment. So, but that's going to be solved once we get the shell on. So what we want to do now is we actually want to prep the shell. Now, what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to remove a little bit of material right here and right here on the opposite side so that the wires have somewhere to go through. So I will do that and be right back with you. All right, so now as you can see, we've actually removed that little piece of material from here and here. Now we can, or should at least, be able to just slide this back on and negotiate the wires to go around. You got to be very, very careful. Be patient. Take your time. This is not a race. And just like that, they are down and around. So at this point, we can actually just go ahead and replace our cab. And it just snaps right back on like so. Now, you may have noticed that we do have a fair bit of extra wire here. So we're going to have to deal with that somehow. But that's an issue for later. But right now, what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to start prepping our tender. So, as you'll recall from earlier, we already removed our two little stripes down the side here, but we also need to remove these right here as they'll interfere with our wires here and our capacitor here. So, you can just do this with side cutters, just going in and doing that, and it should just come right out. And if you're lucky, it'll even just snap the entire thing off rather than having to do two. So we're just going to do this exact same thing on the other side. And just right on out it comes. So now what we want to do is we're actually going to add a little tail light. Now we do sell these LEDs on our shop online and to retailers, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to orient it so that it's pointing down, sitting actually right about there. That way it's clear of our speaker. So first off, we're actually going to want to take another one of our items, the two-piece micro connector kit, as well as some shrink tubing. You can see I've already got a couple pieces pre-cut, as well as a 1000 ohm resistor. And we're going to want to basically bend this so like so that it'll just sit right inside like that. And then of course we're going to want to run wires to a connector, which is going to connect to our green wire and our blue wire that we still have over here yet to use. So I'm going to prep the shell of the tender and I will be right back. All right, so what we've done here is we've gone ahead and we've bent the pit leads on our LED so that they'll fit in that corner. And we've also gone ahead and soldered a resistor to it so that we've got one right there. So as you can see, we've gone ahead and actually wired up the wires as well. You'll notice this piece of longer shrink here, this is actually where our resistor is sitting. If you look closely, you can see the bump there and there. That is the end of the resistor. So what we're going to want to do now is we're going to want to take this and we're going to want to glue it right there like that. So I will do that and be right back with you. By now the glue will have dried and we're ready to go ahead and move forth. So you can see our light is positioned under there. Now we want to work with these two wires. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to figure out about how much wire it takes for them to sort of loop back to about the halfway point and cut them off about there. So that's one. And that's two. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to strip and tin these, and then we're actually going to want to solder them to this connector right here. Now, as you can see, it's got two pins and two little holes that we can solder our wires into. So we're going to do that and be right back. All right, so as you can see, we've gone ahead and wired in our connector. We've got our heat shrink over it. So now we just need to wire the other side into our blue and green wire over here on the engine. So we're going to want to cut our green wire to where it's got just a little bit of slack and is right next to our blue wire. If you're doing this at home, I would strongly recommend leaving more blue wire here than I did, but we'll work with it. So now we're going to do standard practice, strip, tin, on both of these, and then we will solder them to our connector. So we will do that and be right back. Alrighty, so with our plug attached and our heat shrink on, what we can do now is we can actually go ahead and plug this in. So we're going to want to make sure that we solder the polarities right on the LED so that the red wire goes to our positive. Now we should just be able to plop this shell on, like so. See, we got full range of movement. Now, we're gonna go ahead, set up a track, and show you the first test run. All right, so we hope you learned something during the install guide, or at least found it entertaining. Nevertheless, in front of us, you can see we have our test track set up. Let's see if the audio works. Looks like it does, and we've got our movement in both directions. Alrighty, so hope you found that informative. And if you have any questions about the install, contact us at support@soundtraxx.com or by phone at 970-259-0690.